My name's Katherine, and I'm part of the team here at HTB. I was born in London, but my parents immigrated from Hong Kong to England, which technically makes me British-born Chinese. I grew up on a council estate, and by the grace of God, I became the first person in my family to become a lawyer. I lived in New York for 10 years, and I became an immigration lawyer, partly because I wanted to serve and advocate for people who were just like my parents. And in my over 10 years of legal practice, representing clients from all across the world, I was really struck by how most people want the same things for their life. They want access to better opportunities, access to education for their children, access to healthcare, to job security, and to safety. And when we think about worship, we can tend to think about it as the sung part of our service, the bit where we get to sing songs expressing our love and devotion to God. And that is certainly a part of worship. But when Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment in the law? He responds in Matthew 22 by saying this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. We worship God with our whole lives. The center of our worship is God, and it starts there. But really, worship has no circumference. There is no end to our worship, because the whole of life is connected to worship. How you treat your neighbor, how you love your brother, how you spend your money, how you use your voice and your influence is all connected to worship. And that's why worship and justice are basically inseparable. It's been said that worship without mission is self-indulgent, and mission without worship is self-defeating. When Mother Teresa was asked how she spends her day, she said that she wakes up every morning and she would meditate on Jesus, and then she would go out and look for him in disguise. And I think this is how we should worship. Nikki Gumbel spoke to my friend, Dr. Mo Akindolie, a consultant paediatrician in the NHS. And Dr. Mo shares about all that she's been seeing on the front lines in the NHS. And she has dared to use her influence and to speak up for those who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Part of our worship involves justice. When we see inequality and injustice around us, we should dare to speak up, to remember the lives of people who are suffering and voiceless, to lament with people who are in loss, pain, and grief, and then to do all that we can to help. Love your neighbor as yourself are the words of Jesus. This is our act of worship. Take a look at this interview with Dr. Mo Akindolie.
So I'm a consultant in ambulatory paediatrics, and I work in a southeast London hospital.
And Mo, you've been a member of it. How long have you been in part of the HTB congregation?
It's 15 years now.
Wow. Now you have been at the forefront of BAME issues with the NHS and so on. Just say a little bit about your experience with this issue.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it started early on, really, when the initial healthcare professional deaths started to be announced, sadly. I think it was very apparent to anyone looking at the pictures there that Black and minority ethnic doctors were heavily overrepresented. And that's been very evident from early on in the pandemic, and questions are being asked because it's not just the healthcare professionals, it's in the populations that are adversely affected by coronavirus as well. Again, we see Black and minority ethnic communities heavily overrepresented. And it's been a challenge to kind of escalate that and elevate that to the level of attention which it commands. And that's been a point of some frustration for a lot within the healthcare community, but also thinking about the communities that we serve, ensuring that people's voices are heard and that actions are implemented to remedy this trend. Just to give you an example, Nikki, the data that we have now shows that 94% of the doctors who have died from COVID-19 are from a Black and minority ethnic background, and that is a pandemic within a pandemic. It's often described in the media as an emerging trend, but it's not an emerging trend, it's a very apparent fact. And it's just been getting policy leaders to pay attention to this, to represent it truthfully in the media, to implement risk assessments for the groups that are at risk, and to protect healthcare professionals who, if we consider, particularly in London, where I work, about 50% of the workforce are from a Black and minority ethnic background. So you're talking about a significant proportion of your workforce who are terrified coming to work, who are, there's already the commitment of being a key worker, there's a sense of duty and obligation there, but it's balanced by a real fear. And it really came closer to home on a personal level quite early on in the pandemic. It was one of the first few doctors who died, was someone that I know very well within my professional network. A phenomenal man who had come back from retirement at the call, took up the call to action, had come out of retirement to join the front line, and sadly got COVID and spent some time on intensive care and sadly died. And it just sent ripples of deep grief through our whole community. And when it's personalized, when it's not just a number or statistic, but it's a named person that it suddenly brings it so close to home that there's no option but to speak up when there's a sense of injustice about what's going on.
And what actions should be taken?
I think, firstly, naming it and speaking up in a transparent way. And the starting point is to name it. There's a lot of fear about naming it. There's a lot of reticence to call it what it is. But you can't really deal with it effectively if you're shying away from naming it for what it is. So the first step, I think, is acknowledging. And so for healthcare leaders to say this is a pandemic within a pandemic. And then it's taking decisive action that aligns with we are serious with protecting our staff. It's doing the right research. It's publishing it in a way that makes sense. It's dispersing to healthcare organizations and trusts and community trusts. This is what you need to do for your risk assessment. And this is how you need to protect all your vulnerable staff, especially those from a BME background who are overrepresented in the deaths. And
at the same time as that report's coming out and we're seeing a disproportionate death rate and sickness, there's the whole issue that's now coming from America and George Floyd. And just say what are you feeling right now? What is your reaction to what's happened?
I think these are deeply, deeply saddening times. It's just heartbreaking when those videos emerged, to just see someone's life taken away on camera. It's been going on for decades, and it's now being recorded and captured. So we can't ignore it. We can't pretend it's something that's affecting them over there, because we're all involved. George Floyd represents, he's someone's father, he's someone's brother, it's just, there's a deep saddening about it, because it just feels like enough is enough. And at the same time, it just feels like now is the time to speak up about it, because enough is enough. And we can't avoid the uncomfortable conversations. We can't shy away from it. And we collectively need to be grappling with these difficult conversations. Obviously, as a Christian community, we need to be praying corporately, specifically about this, and supplementing that prayer with taking decisive actions. And we can all do it in our own parts, that wherever we are, whichever realm or professional sphere we work in, with the internet now, there's so many resources. So it's taking, putting it to prayer, educating yourself. There's no excuse for anyone to say, oh, I didn't know. Educate yourself, and then it's about taking action.
I mean, I do think it's important that we don't say, "No, look, this is a black problem. So you guys, this is my problem as much as it's his problem."
And that's the key. That's the key, Nikki. I think that literally I had tingles down my spine as I listened to your sermon, because it does, when it's spoken by a white vicar who lives in South Kensington, that signals very boldly to everybody that it is not just an issue for the Black community, that, as you say, we're diverse and we're unified together. This is a human race problem.
Mo, thank you so much. I know your time is so valuable, and I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you.
And it's wonderful having you as part of the HTB community. We're so blessed. We are so blessed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.